Good morning, Smite fans, and welcome to another day of Smite Esports on this lovely Thursday morning. My name is J-Mac. Joining me is Taco here for the Smite Challenger Circuit EU, the first day of the week. We've got Goodnight Nick taking on Just F6. It's going to be a little interesting because we got a sub playing in here for Goodnight Nick.
Yeah, should be. It always definitely changes the team dynamic whenever you have to play with a substitute on the field, but you have to imagine that the team at least feels relatively comfortable with this player to actually choose to go forward with them for this set.
Taking a look at the schedule ahead of us for the week, Just F6 Goodnight Nick will be our matchup for today. Pandemonium Team Joystick will be our Saturday. Post SPL for Saturday will be Snake Hunters and Elysium for the side of EU. Now that we're in week 3, we get to take a look at the new standings after a couple matches have been played. Elysium and Joystick sitting at the top of the charts for now. Pandemonium Snake Hunters sitting at the split 1-1 at the bottom of the chart. Goodnight Nick at Just F6.
And you have to imagine this is a relatively difficult time for Goodnight Nick as well, knowing that you're not exactly off to the greatest start that you were looking for split number 2. But at the same time, J-Mac, I definitely think that there's still plenty of opportunity here for the team to bounce back.
This is a veteran team. This is Deathwalker's team playing on Goodnight Nick. As we mentioned, there is a sub. It's subbing in for Okeanos. So we're going to have Krakitos taking in on that role. We'll see how they're able to perform with this team for Goodnight Nick. It's a squad of veteran players. It's not like they're new to the block. These are not the new kids joining in. They've been in the Smite scene for a long time. Even got some pretty veteranship names with it.
And I think that this is where you definitely expect some of those veteran players to kind of stand out a little bit more so, because you're going to have to rely on them, I think, a little bit heavier to kind of guide the way for those substitutes to really get them as meshed into the team synergy and team environment as possible.
One of the players I'm going to be looking at for this Just F6 team is going to be Worst Turtle, popping out of the jungle. Has had a very crazy performance over the last couple of splits that they've played in the SCC. That jungle position has made a lot of shifts, however, so that's where I really want to put a lot of focus towards to see how they're able to perform with the way that the meta is developed for these new junglers.
Yeah, not only that, but I think that dual lane is also probably one of the more controversial positions right now, because it can be a make or break side lane, but at the same time, if you're getting a lot of impact coming out of the soul lane, coming out of the jungle, then you can sort of rely on the core dynamic to kind of shift elsewhere. But I definitely think that this could be a prime opportunity for Team Joystick as well. Don't want to just be gassing up Goodnight Nick here, because again, these are the two teams, bottom of the standings currently, but still relatively new into Split 2, relatively, I don't want to say still new to that shift in the meta with boots having been removed, but I definitely think that now we're starting to see that transition phase, J-Mac, where players are starting to become a little bit more familiar with what actually works best since those changes have taken place.
Yeah, the big difference between competitive play and the rank scene, sure, you can play all the top ranked picks. You had multiple weeks before this to practice in the rank scene, but it's not the same as that competitive level of play forward. So seeing how Just F6 has now adapted, now that we're 3 weeks in to the current meta for them of competitive play, we'll see how they've made their adaptation. But as we mentioned, they're going against Goodnight Nick on the flip side of a Deathwalker, Ice, Wolfie, Kalas, all huge names on that team.
And I think Deathwalker is also someone that's really entertaining to follow along with, because you don't really know what to expect. We've been seeing a lot of Guardian play from him recently. I would imagine that with some of the Guardians like Cthulhu starting to surface now in the Smite Pro League, that's bound to have a trickle-down effect towards the Smite Challenger Circuit as well, because what tends to work in competitive play usually works at this level of competitive play as well.
One thing I would like to see is the rest of the team really stepping up. It felt like the last time that we did watch Goodnight Nick, Deathwalker was trying his best to put the team in his backpack. That Mulan did some disgusting work that game, but unfortunately that Mulan was just not enough for them to win.
I was also a pretty big fan of Ice on the Awelish. We have so many Awelish highlights because you have to remember Ice Baby was giving Adapting a fair run for his money last week, and if they could look that solid against Elysium, I think that there is definitely a lot of potential here between Deathwalker and Ice Baby to be kind of those core Catalyst members to really get the ball rolling here for Goodnight Nick.
We'll see how these teams like to adjust with the new meta as the picks and bans are ready to go. We've been seeing way more Sylvanas than I ever would have thought we would see coming out of these teams. The EU, the big region to popularize it. I think we saw it 3 or 4 picks in just the first week of play alone, and then a lot of bans afterwards. So these teams really do seem to like Sylvanas in EU.
I think at the competitive level of play, it's always fair to look for those individual target bans. And hi-rez, we've seen him on the Sylvanas jungle, and he actually rocked it the last time that he was able to get that pick. And it does introduce, I think, a solid front line member as well, which gives the side lanes a little bit more leeway to look for some of those more aggressive picks. So just F6, maybe something to look out for. But right now, actually surprised to see Goodnight Nick in that first pick position, and they're eliminating the Terra from themselves.
And the Artemis and Morgan Le Fay as well. Meanwhile, flip side, Tiamat Athena, who's really risen as of recently, and not just for the support role. We've been seeing it going solo quite often as of recent, and then the Heimdall just to boot with it for just F6. First pick goes the way of Goodnight Nick, and it will be those Cyrus left open. Still a lot of other picks as well. Gilgamesh available. They've taken the two primary mages, but we still have some big supports left on the table, like the Emoja, like the Fafnir as well.
Raijin, also another popular mid lane pick that's left available here. Just a lot of focus, I think, surrounding burst damage seems to be the emphasis for Just F6, and I actually like this from Just F6. Seeing that establishment early on of the Honor is really cool, because you know that Goodnight Nick are running a substitute. You know that their substitute is coming in for their hunter, and with Krakitos, he's going to have his work cut out for him, I think, because Just F6, they're a dual lane that's had that time to practice and really get familiar with each other, so it can be difficult when you're having to deal with such an aggressive pick from the get-go.
And usually what we do see out of a lot of substitutes when they sub in for these ADC position is they go to the Jingwei because it's safe. Overall, you have a sub, they may not be as comfortable in the role, or they may not be as comfortable with the team. You give them Jingwei, you get to let them farm on an island for however long you need them to. Couple that with Kalos' signature Fafnir, which is so crazy that we're actually getting to see him play Fafnir, considering for most of his SPL career, this was probably the #1 god banned away from him.
A solid response, I think, from Just F6 to look for that Yemoja. I think she introduces a nice separation factor, could make things a little bit more restrictive for Kalos on that Fafnir, not really giving him the mobility that he's looking for in terms of initiation. And plus, Fafnir, you tend to want to be aggressive with that pick. Jingwei is not necessarily something that accomplishes that for me, but I do like the pairing of it with this Osiris. The Osiris still being a little vague as to whether or not it's intended for solo or jungle here, but either way, Goodnight Nick, all three gods selected so far, able to escape from the Odin cage without a Phantom being a necessity.
We do have a 6th pick Yemoja coming from Just F6, not something you get to see every day. Meanwhile, as the bans start popping through, Scylla and Raijin, so taking off two really top-tier mid laners, especially with that Raijin. Meanwhile, the flip side, a little bit of respect thrown towards the jungler. Camazotz and Wheelish banned away from Just F6 by Goodnight Nick. In response, we will see a Soul. We've seen this go into the mid lane more often with this Just F6 team, so and with the On Her locked in, very likely that's where we are going to see it go in.
I was personally hoping that we might have an opportunity to see Baron Somebody break out with all of the Osiris preferences.
I really hope so.
I think that we might start seeing a little bit more surge in popularity towards Baron. He has a pretty solid matchup and is probably one of the better mages, I think, for trying to actually control all the pressure that Osiris is usually able to kind of facilitate around the map. But the Baba Yaga, I like the burst damage that Goodnight Nick is kind of rounding their draft out with. They have a lot of shred potential as well between the Jingwei and Osiris off that Fafnir coerce. Nike even something to definitely keep an eye out for. Still not totally sold on whether this Nike is for solo or if it's intended for hi-rez in the jungle.
There's been a lot of flexibility. I think that's thanks to the SPL that we've been seeing kind of Nike could go jungle, could go solo. As far as the SPL's been going, Nike's more often than not been running the jungle, but Osiris, I don't know. I have not been sold on an Osiris jungle outside of maybe 1 or 2 players in quite some time. It just doesn't seem to have the same hold-up that other warrior jungles have, like the Erlong Shen or the Gilgamesh. So I am curious where Goodnight Nick is going to run this Osiris. I want to say this feels like a Deathwalker god, but at the same time, Nike kind of fits that boot as well.
I think the one certainty that we can look for between this Nike and the Osiris is that one of them is guaranteed to pick up that Mannequin Scepter early on, likely to be transitioning into the Hidden Blade. It's been such a popularized item upgrade as of late, J-Mac. And one thing that I can say is that whether it's for hi-rez or for Deathwalker, it introduces a very strong burst dynamic, which again is something that I think Just of 6 really need to keep an eye out for, because they have the Odin, but I'm not totally sold on the follow-up potential surrounding that cage.
With mentioning the Mannequin Hidden Blade, I think it works for either of these gods, honestly, because of that leap initiation that they have, whether it be from Osiris's ultimate or Nike's leap in general, being able to dive into the back line. As we get into game number 1 here, Goodnight Nick just F6, J-Mac and Taco with Doug on the spectator for us, and looking across the board, nothing crazy out of the ordinary that I can spot just yet. Sands of Time for Baba Yaga, a little curious as we've been seeing the Vamp Shroud more often than not.
Vamp Shroud has been super popular, but it doesn't seem as though Isotos has any interest in taking it either. It's going to be the Gilded Arrow start for this Soul, but a tiny trinket as well, so still trying to lean into some of that self-sustain that I think Soul is so popular for here, J-Mac. But overall, I think that these are relatively stable side lanes. It could really just go either direction here. I think it's going to purely come down to execution, because that late game factor that Worst Turtle has brought to the playing field with the Kali, definitely something that, I don't want to say it forces Goodnight Nick to play against the clock, so to say, but it's definitely something you keep in the back of your mind.
It's one thing to always hold on to with gods like Kali or even gods like Mercury, but hold that. Krakito gets hit by the Riptide, has the beads to walk back through the second one, and Toddy accidentally walks into it himself. Gets knocked away. Rotwin trying to close the gap as well as Toddy, but that one little misstep with the Riptide, Toddy's not able to close the gap. Krakito does manage to make it out.
Toddy, I think, maybe misgauging exactly how close he was to stepping into that Yamoja Riptide, but another nice Riptide pull back. Rotwen is determined to try and make this first blood happen onto Krakito, but no luck so far. Level 1 Jingwei still managing to hold on to dear life, and now level 2 ticking in. Certain that Krakito's got to be taking the agility second ability just to make sure he doesn't fall down early.
Hey, that was a bar right there. Agility second ability? Keep that one for your tracks later.
It almost rhymes with Krakito. I'm not gonna lie.
Almost. Riptide again. Rotwin is disgusting with these Riptides early on.
What do you think inspired the names, by the way, sometimes for player tags? Like I wonder what the origin of Krakito might be. Maybe because he's cracked.
Maybe so.
You think that's what it comes from?
Possibly so. But then where does the Kalos come through as well? Always curious on where players do come up with their names. Mine's fairly simple. You take first letter of first name, the Mac from my last name, and then I kind of just pulled.
So you can't go wrong with the real life names.
Right.
I understand that. I mean, I honestly, at 10 years old, I should have probably thought mine through a little bit further. But you know, I just want to be the best, man. I just wanted to be the best, and I love tacos.
It's gotta be the best. That's how it is. That's just how easy it is sometimes. Speaking of easy, it's been an easy duo lane for Just F6. They've kept Krakito and Kalos pushed back to the Tier 1 tower. Now looking for an invade at this purple buff. Ice rotating over. Will spot them out. Might even be looking for a fight. Rotwin gets stunned. Knocked up by Krakito. Ice throwing some damage with the Ren. Riptide comes through, but no more Omi available for Rotwin. Just needs a couple more basics. Ice unable to close the gap, but Krakito does manage to get the final basic and strikes first blood.
The prey becomes the predator here as this Jingwei. It is almost a tragedy for Rotwin, given how consistently he was connecting with those Riptides, but disaster could be spelled here for Deathwalker. Seems as though his blue buff was successfully invaded, so a nice punish from Worst Turtle to make up for some of that early game pressure that took place on the opposite side of the map. A good way to try and pull the attention, I think, of Ice, but Ice definitely having the right idea to emphasize focusing that duo lane. When you have a substitute in play, you have to imagine, especially with Just of 6 duo lane draft alone, that they're going to be wanting to play aggressive through there.
Taco, I just realized something very important. We're finally past the benevolence for the SCC as well.
Yes.
We're finally past the benevolence phase almost entirely, I would say. I don't think I've seen a single benevolence picked up outside of my casual games where I'm still seeing 4 or 5 of them picked up even almost a week later. Like, guys, it's been nerfed. You can go ahead and stop picking it up now. But thankfully, we won't be seeing a slew of them here in these SCC matchups. Instead, it's been replaced by the Sentinels as far as the supports go.
Yeah, support players, it was nice knowing different starter varieties, but that has now been taken away probably forever because gold spooling, unfortunately, breaks
really
Conquest.
It's really good. Like, really good. Hey, you want free gold just for existing? Yeah, sure, why not?
You want to give up every objective and still be 2,000 gold again? Yeah, I guess that's kind of cool.
At least it's not like week 1 Benevolence where you ran 5 of it in the arena and you were just like 10,000 gold ahead by the 6-minute mark, just deathballing at people.
I think that my favorite part about it is that I have seen a steep reduction in the amount of animosity gamers I've been having to deal with personally, and yeah, that item's a bit of a menace as well. Ice being a menace here on Worst Turtle speed buff, gonna be successful with the Nike invade, but Worst Turtle, he's gonna give hot pursuit.
We're sort of a little low on mana. Ice sitting at half health. Uses the Sentinel of Zeus, but Supernova just does way too much damage. Chunks not just through the health shield, but through the rest of the health bar as well.
Great tracking there from Sodos as well, and a really nice punish from Worst Turtle and his mid laner. Those are the kinds of plays that you have to capitalize on, because you never want to let the enemy jungler get a complete freebie off of you, and it looked like Worst Turtle was basically just going to be a goner there, but definitely a great heads-up play there from Sodos, and that's going to keep things all but even now between these two teams.
Draugr in response gets picked up, and thank you, Kalos, for properly tanking the Draugr. I made a joke about this with Mifflin at one point for one of the SPL players who didn't properly tank Draugr, gets knocked out of the ring for it. It's Kalos showing you the proper way to do it. If you're not the carry, you're support, and you back yourself up to a wall so you stay within the pit.
You know, in their defense, though, J-Mac, sometimes you just... Draugr kind of doesn't really do anything, man.
Really doesn't.
It is so easy to kill. I can definitely understand why players might get a little bit, you know, just lackadaisical about it, but at the same time, it can definitely be a good punishing point if the other duo lane is paying attention and you happen to get knocked out. Always entertaining watching steals go down in the Draugr pit whenever one team gets it down to that, like, 1 HP tick.
It's just like the Alpha Harpy kind of used to be on that left side of the map, but now that's been split. It's the 2 smaller, not so Alpha Harpies anymore. You do have the 2 Scorpions, which that's always the real fun, is seeing the Scorpion 3 pip health battle. Who's going to get that last base? You leave it at 2 for so long and finally decide, okay, I'm going to strike, but step in their way to block their auto, get that second hit with it, and steal it away. 6.5 minutes in, 1-1 on the board. 200 gold separating these two teams at most. Experience pretty even across the board, aside from a few half levels that are on the side of just F6.
Yeah, Soto's really only having that lead over Wolfie thanks to that kill onto Ice when he went for Worst Turtle's speed buff invade. And not only that, but because Ice died, I mean, that does give Worst Turtle a free chance to basically re-establish his own buff timer. But Goodnight Nick, I think, playing the map fairly well. They're going to take advantage of pulling the Gorp and do secure it uncontested. It doesn't seem as though Just S6 is really all that concerned about losing these Scorpions early on. It's really the objective after the fact that they're going to be keeping an eye out for.
Despite losing that speed buff earlier, Worst Turtle does manage to hold a slight lead thanks to the rotation from Sodos, able to pick up the kill at Ice when they had made that rotation up there. And ever since then, it's been dead quiet here from Ice. Not making any ganks in any of the lanes. It's been dead quiet in the mid lane, like I said, aside from Sodos rotating over. But lane-to-lane matchup, really only been seeing fighting in the duo lane.
And I think I would like to see a little bit more proactive aggression from Goodnight Nick, because you're the one running the warrior jungle. You want to try and abuse this early on, but instead it's Kalos getting abused in the mid lane. Wow. Worst Turtle claims a first kill of the game for himself, and Just F6 absolutely melting Kalos on that Fafnir. It wasn't even that egregious of an overextension. He just really was not expecting the burst damage.
I just got caught as soon as the leap was down, and a big punish for Just F6, able to take down the support. On the side of Goodnight Nick, Wolfie going to take a little bit of poke, but already with a fully stacked Warlock Sash, or Warlock Staff. Been a long time since Warlock Sash has been in there. The Warlock Staff, though, is stacked up for Wolfie. Kind of the traditional out of the Baba Yaga. Seems to be the go-to stacking item, will be that Warlock Staff as opposed to the Book of Thoth, though. Why not just go for a double stack? I feel like this is the one god in the game you could probably get away with double stacking.
You could definitely get away with it, but it is still relatively expensive to look for those double stacking items. I think that's the primary concern, and when you compare it to some of the more direct power spikes that are available at a slightly cheaper cost for mid laners, I can understand the appeal towards not wanting to prioritize that this early on.
Have you ever gone for the Penta stack on Baba Yaga?
In Arena. That's
never,
about the only time.
Never just in a regular Conquest game, just run it?
Can't say I trust myself enough with mid gods to really feel confident in that?
Run it solo. Run it solo. You get the Warlock staff. You get the Hide of the Urchin.
So you're just out here living your best life, running
you
these kinds of things
sometimes you just
solo.
gotta go with it. Sometimes you just gotta run it down and have some fun with it. The Pentastack, definitely not a viable option, though it does give you a ton of tankiness on top of it because you get Hide of the Urchin, then you get a Gauntlet of Thebes along with it late game. It's a lot of fun, but
you know what you could also do?
Oh, what do you got?
You could buy a Vamp Shroud, and then you get everything and some.
Then
Well, lifesteal and protections.
You get the Blood Soak, so you're super tanky with it. Get a lot of health back whenever you slam. Sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. Maybe we'll try that. Maybe I'll have to try that sometime.
I'm more a fan of the Sacrificial Shroud. I don't know what it is, but just immediate burst damage seems a little bit unfair.
Wolfie, using that ultimate, immediately forces Worst Turtle away. Kalas leaps in, chasing down Sodos and Rotwin. Rotwin with no Omi, but the Riptide makes sure they have a speedy escape.
And see, I kind of want to talk about Kalas's relic choice in that first slot, J-Mac, because I understand the approach with the Horrific, especially against a Kali composition. And granted, there is a lot of auto attack focus in general, but we'll get back to that thought in a second. Soto's still under pressure here in mid.
Good thing Disapparate was up for Sodos, able to use that immediately to get back to the safety of the tower. 3 shots from the Ren, 2 hit Sodos, 1 to Rotwin, so Ice Ice not able to get a further follow-up kill or damage towards Sodos. Luckily for Sodos, still has that ultimate available as well, just in case they go for any kind of cheeky dive. Meanwhile, Goodnight Nick setting up for the Gold Fury instantly. Transformation out of Kalas, Sodos, and Rotwin both here. Sodos a little low on mana, may not be able to have enough to get through. Goodnight Nick do secure the Gold Fury. Rotwin expending the ultimate, able to pick up a kill in the process, but may fall in response. Wolfie picks him up with the potion. Worst Turtle stunned and burned down. Has to use the Destruction ultimate, looking for a leap away. Deathwalker goes in with the ult. Needs just one more basic after the sickle, or maybe just the Mystical Mail to chase him down.
And that is the risk first reward of having that blink as your first relic. Wasn't even available to start that fight off, was still chilling on cooldown from an earlier engagement there from Worst Turtle. Just was not expecting that CC chain of events to take place. Also, the early crits as well from Kirkido are definitely noticeable already. Only 2 stacks in that rage after that engagement, J-Mac, and yet I believe 2 or 3 of those autos crit consistently against Worst Turtle, so Worst Turtle's life RNG maybe not in the best spot for him, but if you're Kirkido, you're definitely happy because that's the kind of exchange you're looking for when you opt for crit this early on.
We know who's been praying to the RNG gods this week, and so far it's been Goodnight Nick with those big crits out of Kirkido. As you mentioned, Rage built. Not often we see Rage as a second item. Usually we've been seeing it 3rd or 4th item if it's actually picked up. Aside from, I think, Mercury Jungle, we've been seeing it a couple times picked up in that second slot, but Kirkido immediately going into crit this game.
A little bit more of a Jingwei exclusive, if I'm being honest, given that her explosive bolts are going to give her the passive crit chance percentage, so it does factor in fairly well, and already sitting at 36% crit chance now with those 2 stacks on top of the 30%, and then I believe, 3% for every stack that Rage gets, up to 10 stacks, which is a pretty steep amount if you think about it.
Toddy gets hit by the Persistent Gust, looking for a path out, does manage to have it, use the beads instantly before the Sentinel of Zeus even comes out. Toddy has to use the Aegis from the final damage, airstrike. That's more than enough to take them down. Now Kirkido is in danger, gets stunned right off the Gust, but turns around with some big crits on the Worst Turtle. Sodos rotates over Stellar Burst to slow down Ice Ice, but Ice Ice is not deterred one bit, misses the 3rd shot of Ren, and the ultimate from Sodos just as a defense mechanism immediately through the ultimate from Rotwin just to zone them away, and everybody else from Just F6 able to make it out.
Bit of a missed opportunity there for Ice Ice, one that I'm sure he's probably kicking himself over, but he'll have to worry about it later on, because now with Odin entering the engagement, Lystimix trying to remind everybody that he does in fact exist in this game, even though we've largely just been seeing more of that solo lane presence out of Deathwalker. I think a wise rotation from Lystimix just to persuade Goodnight Nick not to continue diving so deep into the jungle, but got a feel for Toddy there on that one. He did just about everything he possibly could, and still wasn't enough to stay alive.
Yeah, unfortunately, there was 3 people chasing him by the end of it, so they were not going to let him go. 14 minutes in, the tower still can hurt, but against these tankier supports, especially when Kalas is building the Witchblade to give him some of that physical protection and a fully stacked Gauntlet of Thebes, he's more than happy taking up a couple of shots if needed. Kirkido Airstrike's a massive AoE ultimate, so no chance he was getting out of there.
No, well placed as well. Just gave himself the freebie escape out of the tower without having to compromise his positioning too horribly up against the rotations from Just F6. But again, going back to this horrific now combined with the Witchblade, J-Mac, I like the direction for the most part. I'm just not completely sold that this horrific is really going to pan out the way that Collis would want it to, given the fact that I think there is a fair amount of mobility from Just F6 because of those Riptides from Rotwin. I do think that it's pretty feasible for Just F6 to hard disengage, so I think it's really going to depend on how well Goodnight Nick can execute after the fact to really get the maximum utility out of this horrific.
That may have been the perfect timing on dropping that final Totemoku, because I don't see a respawn timer popping back for it. Got it right there at that 15-minute mark. Nice little play there for Goodnight Nick. But immediately to the Pyromancer, Rotwin and Sotos response, as well as Lystemix. Nice damage from the Stellar Burst. Immediately drops the cage out of Lystemix, just trying to see if he can keep anybody locked in. They don't care. Everybody else from Just F6 is backed away. He just drops the cage in a response. Immediately back to the Pyromancer. Goodnight Nick with some huge crits out of Kirkido. I think I saw 3 or 4 of those pop in there.
And I think that's the issue alone with this Odin cage. We've been seeing Lystemix drop this ring time and time again, primarily as a disengage factor, but I don't think that that's where you want to be as Odin. As Odin, you want to be controlling the space. You want to be forcing the enemy team into compromised positions, but I'm just not seeing that effect from the follow-up factors that Just F6 have opted for in their draft. And now with this Oni Fury up for grabs, Goodnight Nick, they're already all in the area, but it seems as though Just F6 has sniffed this one out. Pyromancer not being available means that Oni Fury is the next best thing up for grabs on the map.
And even with the kills being so tight-knit as they are, only sitting at 4-3, you see 3,000 gold in favor of Goodnight Nick just from the farming that's come after. Now, they did get the Pyromancer, so that gives them a little bit of gold. In Just F6, we saw them dissuade Goodnight Nick from taking that Gold Fury, even really starting it up, just making sure to walk forward, show some presence. That way they can't further extend that gold lead.
And Lystemix still hovering with the rest of his team in mid lane. Seems as though this could be Just F6 maybe looking to be the initiators around this Oni Fury. Would make for an interesting play, but Deathwalker still hanging out, and in the dual lane as well, excuse me. But T1 Tower, having been stripped away from Goodnight Nick, does mean that this duo side of the map is a mild bit compromised here. If Just F6 have the opportunity to give hot pursuit, if a team fight's starting to look nice for them, then it might not necessarily be a free survivability aspect here for Goodnight Nick, not having those towers to fall back to right away.
Deathwalker pushed a wave and left, so that way he can immediately make his way towards this Oni Fury, drop down to about 10% health, and it's finally been leashed from Just F6 as they back away. Big stun out of Kalos onto Lystemix. Lystemix responds in kind with a stun of their own, throwing out the spear. Oni Fury picked up yet again, and once again dropped. Pillar comes down, as well as the Stellar Burst from Sotos. Neither team pushing too far forward, nor expending too much. All 10 ultimates still up for the fight.
See, that's the time, though, where you look for the confirmation, because it was just Deathwalker at first, but now it's the entirety of Goodnight Nick having rotated in. Ice in his own little skirmish against Worst Turtle, but it's going to be Kalish jumping in, immediately impaled into the wall.
And Lystemix jumps in, has the blink. Wolfie leaps out. The River's Rebuke drops through Kalos as soon as he lands, taken down by Sotos. Worst Turtle now chasing Ice, who doesn't have that Sentinel of Zeus. Into the back line, we see Deathwalker die, but immediately have to walk away, and Worst Turtle has more than enough chase to take down Ice. Oni Fury ripe and ready for the taking for Just F6, but it looks like they're still aiming for more. Worst Turtle has ultimate available, red buff started, as well as the Oni Fury, and that will go the way of Just F6.
And that was the separation factor that I think we've all been waiting on to see whether or not Just F6 would be able to execute with. Beautifully played there from Lystemix and Rotwin to compromise Kalos in the process, and now it could be Kirkido looking for a 2v1.
No way.
He takes down
Are
one,
you
he's
kidding
about
me?
to get the other.
Are you kidding? Is he really going to get the 2v1? Kirkido with the huge crits takes down not just Toddy, but Rotwin in the 2v1. Can it make it a 3? Starts the back. Worst Turtle hunting, knowing they've got to be behind that wall. Kirkido's got to know that they're on the hunt. Stunned out. Kirkido nowhere near enough damage to go down.
That is the most painful moment there for Kirkido there. excellent usage of the Purification Bees, but no point trying to expend that Aegis without his actual ultimate being up. I don't think there was any opportunity for him to really get away from Worst Turtle there, but Worst Turtle collecting the bounty now off of this Jing Wei is the main reason why I say that that was so detrimental, because the last thing you want to see is a Kali taking out what I think is going to end up being one of the star factors here for Goodnight Nick.
Just F6 are able to close the gap just a little bit, down to about 1,600 gold, where it was teetering around 3,500 previously. But Goodnight, or with Just F6 on that big response, able to help close that gap, like you said. Worst Turtle collecting the bounty off of Kirkido after getting a big double kill in a 2v1 situation. That's going to be a big play up for Goodnight Nick. And it's got to feel good being the sub coming in and having a play like that.
Oh yeah, Kirkido definitely showcasing why Goodnight Nick wanted to bring him in Okeana's place. He is meshing quite well with this roster so far, and not only that, but I mean, anytime you're winning a 2v1, J-Mac, it's about sending a message, and the dominance factor definitely established here for Kirkido. Win or lose, that's going to be one that Rotwin or Toddy is probably going to be haunting them for a little bit.
We do see in response a Spectral Armor picked up for Rotwin, so respecting the fact that this Jing Wei does have some big crits popping through. We were seeing in those jungle camps around 400 plus slamming on those crits, and only going to get worse. Kirkido still needs one more item. Wolfie eats an immense amount of damage from Sodas, takes the Stellar Burst and the Supernova, has to use that Aegis in response.
But it's the jungle gap that I'm really starting to take note of here. That last bounty kill from Kirkido has just elevated Worst Turtle to a nice 2.5, 3-level lead just about. And now Just F6, knowing that Wolfie doesn't have that Aegis available, they're going to feel confident here with pushing down the mid lane. I think one of the primary downfalls here as well for Just F6 in comparison to Goodnight Nick is being the hunter that doesn't have the option to build crit. You just lose 1v1s by default, so Toddy's really going to have to rely playing behind his front line here, I think, if they want to continue to be the ones pressuring into Goodnight Nick.
And that's kind of the worst feeling for it. Now, Toddy does have some lifesteal, so there's some potential boxing presence there, but all it takes is 1 or 2 crits in response for Goodnight Nick's Hunter Kirkido, and that'll pretty much be the end of that lifesteal boon onto it. You do see a little bit of lifesteal with the Cow, but nowhere near the same level of lifesteal that's built with the flip side on Aussie. However, it doesn't matter. Crits are just crits, and when you don't have crit going up against you, it makes it a little bit easier for yourself.
Not only that, but Kirkido, maybe some concerns here for his level of penetration, given that he's relying pretty heavily on this Executioner to be the deciding factor between killing the frontline members or not. Granted, I think his target focus has been solid so far. He's largely been prioritizing trying to commit onto Worst Turtle, Sodos, or Toddy, which, you know, obviously want that to be the incentive there as the hunter with the crit options, but also important to note that Goodnight Nick, I think, have a better opportunity for a sneaky Fire Giant play because of the fact that Kirkido is running this crit-oriented build. A lot easier for them to shred it down, especially when they have that Fafnir in tow.
Looking across the board, gold has pretty much evened out. In fact, just a tad bit in favor of Just F6. Experience kind of teetering between the two of them. I would probably say that experience is the way of Just F6 with their Kali now hitting level 20. Meanwhile, Ice still hasn't even gotten close enough to that mark, sitting level 17 comparatively. 4 full items for Worst Turtle with that serrated edge finished up. Rotwin zoning Deathwalker away. Lystemix walks forward, eats quite a few crits from the Hunter, immediately with the ult transformation out of Kalas, and the cage dropping down. River's Rebuke in the backline. Ice the only one trapped inside. He's not too worried. It's Worst Turtle, who's a little scared for it. Dives onto Wolfie, but immediately gonna be taken down by Deathwalker as soon as he thinks stepping too far forward. Lystemix gets the response kill with it, but taken down by Kirkido. Pushing forward, dive in from Wolfie, and Deathwalker, Ice diving way to the back line, trying to find Toddy. Rotwin low. Kirkido finds he gets the big double. Kalas picks up one, and the lone member left. Toddy looking to be taken down. Kirkido with the triple kill on the Jing Wei.
And that's going to be a clean deicide wipe here for Goodnight Nick. What looked like such a promising engagement for Just F6 is absolutely turned on its head. A great job, I think, from Goodnight Nick at handling that Kali dive into the backline. Just not enough gas left in the tank there, I think, for Worst Turtle to actually commit to Wolfie with the entirety of Goodnight Nick surrounding him. That's the level of appeal that you have to consistently be looking for up against the likes of this Kali. And Goodnight Nick, because of the fact that they wiped everyone from Just of 6, they can chill and wait it out until Wolfie has respawned, so it's not like he even missed anything to begin with.
Yeah. Always got to feel good when you can get a Fire Giant after you've been dead for the majority of the fight with it, or should say at least the tail end of the fight where Wolfie fell down. Fire Giant does go the way of Goodnight Nick. Got to feel good coming with that buff around their waist. Primal Fury has spawned, always an option for Goodnight Nick should they decide to back away from these tower fights, which is where a lot of the fighting is going to be happening now, will be around those Phoenixes. I don't imagine that Just F6 is going to put up too many tier 2 defenses.
And hey, it's been working out super well for him so far, so Krakito, he's going to keep hammering down into this crit-oriented build. A short sword not picked up. Guarantee that that's going to be a Deathbringer just to really round out this crit build. He's got the Cal upgrade as well. And with Primal Fury being up for grabs, that's just something that Goodnight Nick, they don't have to take it right away, but may as well, just to prevent Just F6 from having those sort of comeback mechanics available for them on the map. There's always the Kali factor. Don't get me wrong, J-Mac. That's something that you can always depend on. But it is much more difficult for a Kali to do Kali things with the level of control that Goodnight Nick have been able to utilize through this Osiris, Nike, and Fafnir, as well as the fact that Krakito's got the crits to boot.
Wolfie's got that Rata Tahuti online, so imagine some big chunky numbers coming from those potion tosses and that wild magic as well. So be keeping a lookout for Wolfie, but Krakito is sitting at the top of the player damage chart, and no surprise with all the crits that they've been landing this game. Not surprised to see that they're topping that chart.
Amazed to see Worst Turtle actually opt for the Mace mannequin upgrade as opposed to that hidden blade that we've been so accustomed to seeing as of late, J-Mac. But Goodnight Nick, sure to continue trying to take advantage of their leads where they are given. Now confirming both T2 towers, and that's a decent chunk of gold for the Goodnight Nick members to back and buy with. You can see everybody just about spending nearly 2K in hand. That's more than enough for Krakito to finish off that Deathbringer, maybe even buying a Sentry Ward as well, just to provide his team with a little bit more vision. And now the clock is kind of ticking on this Fire Giant, but there's still plenty of time left over for Goodnight Nick to try and seize that last remaining T2 tower. And if Just F6 are feeling up to it, they could try to contest here, J-Mac, knowing that that Fire Giant's going to be wearing off soon enough, but definitely a risky situation given the fact that if they die now, it's almost certain going to lead to Goodnight Nick closing this one out.
They do manage to take the Pyromancer, however, for Just F6. They get a small consolation prize after losing pretty much everything else across the board on the map. We saw Tier 1 and Tier 2 from the dual lane taken out. Mid lane Tier 2 tower, only one left standing, and that's not for much longer. We see Kalas, Krakito, and Wolfie grouping up on this right side. I like the choice of the Emperor's Armor from Kalas, reducing the attack speed of those structures, meaning that they can tank that up just a little while longer. It almost feels like when somebody builds that Emperor's Armor, you almost immediately have to respond with one of your own. Deathwalker gonna a nice chunky bit of damage from the Phoenix, gets caught through the Riptide, has to take a couple more tower shots.
Goodnight Nick being patient with this push onto that right side Phoenix. Just remember, if Just F6 loses this one, not the absolute worst case scenario given that it is the Phoenix closest to the Fire Giant side, primarily the most defendable one. And Worst Turtle, I like what he's doing here with this hover, waiting for the perfect opportunity to look for a flank, and this is exactly what the Kali has to do to turn this one around.
The Stemix blinks in, drops the cage, as well as a River's Rebuke from Rotwin, but nobody's in any danger from it. Kalas gets a transformation. Wolfie uses the home sweet home to get a massive amount of damage onto Toddy, forces the entire team back away from the Phoenix, and Goodnight Nick are just able to walk in and take it from there, knowing that the two big zoning ultimates are now gone. Worst Turtle about to be stunned away by Deathwalker. Kalas got one nice shot, forced them to leap away as well. Ice Eyes blocking some basics with the barrier formation, able to make sure to zone for the team. Kalas takes a sunder. Goodnight Nick, they back away just for the time.
But it's all coming down to Krakito on this Jingwei. Not going to be able to kill the Phoenix just yet. Worst Turtle now coming to the back line. Good Aegis from Wolfie, but he's still alive for the time being. Worst Turtle still on pursuit. Gets the Kali ultimate off and stays alive for the time being.
Able to get at least one down with it. Listemic picks up one, and Toddy picks up a double kill 4 down on the side of Goodnight Nick. Off of that greedy push in the mid lane, it's only Krakito left, and their response is to immediately head towards the left side while the rest of Just F6 starting to push down this middle Phoenix. You can see all 5 players pushing forward. Is he gonna go for a base race?
This might actually be the opportunity for Just F6 to close this one out. J-Mag, Krakito gonna back after taking that left side Firebird, but it might be too little too late. 30 seconds left for the rest of Goodnight Nick to come into play, and Krakito, he just doesn't have enough, I think, to stop them from ending.
Dives in the back, the crits are good, but not good enough. Has to use the airstrike away immediately, and Goodnight Nick fall off of the mid lane Phoenix fight. And in the end, Just F6 are able to come out with a Game 1 win.
And that is the Kali factor, J-Mac, coming to fruition. Really well executed by Just F6 towards the end there. That looked practically guaranteed for Goodnight Nick to be able to close it out. They did everything right until they didn't.
Unfortunately, for Goodnight Nick, they fall down in game number 1. We'll be back after a break to get ready for game number 2.
Take your stuff back, baby, it's you, baby, it's you, What did you think? What did you could say whatever and I would never hear. You've been flexing everywhere. Girl, look in the mirror. Man, you're so dirty. Yeah, you look so dirty. You were never worthy. Lately, it's you. You stole your peace, put it on me. But baby, it's you. Lying like a ride, but take your stuff back. Baby, it's you. Baby, it's you. If I control the weather, then every day would rain on your parade. Shine, you can't change, yeah. If I was Father Time, then I would change the day. So I never saw your face. What do I have to do to make you go? Oh, baby, it's you. It's you. It's you. It's you.
some solid gameplay out of Goodnight Nick through the majority of the game, but one little misstep at the mid lane. Phoenix and Just F6 able to capitalize on it, run it down mid, and end game number 1, taking the win. J-Mac Tucker and the Best Taco with me to break down really what all happened besides that game 1. It was pretty much even across the board. We did see a nice 2v1 kill out of Krakito fighting against Just F6, but besides that, it just felt like they were maintaining order, and then it all just fell apart.
I think I feel the worst for Krakito in this scenario. J-Mac comes in as a substitute, has a slam dunk of a performance, gets quite a highlight clip debut, just for it to all come to nothing at the end of it. Just F6 prioritizing this Kali definitely worked out for them in the end here, J-Mac, because I don't think that comeback happens any other way unless Worst Turtle is on this late game menace.
And thanks to Listamix as well, getting that cage back off of cooldown when he had it in the previous fight. And that's kind of one of the big boons of Odin, is that ultimate, not quite the same 90-second that a lot of other gods have, and because of it, he's able to capitalize, trap, 3 people inside, and just allow Worst Turtle to start chainsawing through the entirety of Goodnight Nick.
And I think that's one of the issues as well with a lot of these burst shred compositions that are dependent on that Fafnir presence, J-Mac, because you can do everything right, you can play the objectives perfectly, but if you get separated for even a minute, that's all it takes, is a single moment for everything to collapse underneath you, and Goodnight Nick just did not have anything left over to try and deal with that late game rushdown from Just F6. Kali, Soul, on her, more than enough capability as well at shredding those objectives. That Titan just never really stood a chance towards the end there, and if anything, I think it's more so some of that veteranship experience could definitely come heavily into play here, because Krakito, again, being a substitute, being new to this Smite Challenger circuit, he might not necessarily have the mental fortitude to recover from this, but that's where I think those veteran members like Ice, like Wolfie, Callis, Deathwalker can really step in and be like, hey, look, we know it happened, we know it went south, but there's always a chance to bring it back in Game 2 and force us out to a Game 3 set.
We'll see what they change up here for the Picks and Bans game number 2. Honestly, I think comp-wise, execution-wise, everything went fairly well. It just came down to one little team fight at the end of it, so I'm not going to say do the salty run back by any means. No need to ever do any kind of salty run back when you're doing a play as well as that. Maybe change up a couple of bans, but we do see Goodnight Nick, again, not wanting to go for the Artemis, probably sticking with that safety. I maybe imagine with this Artemis ban looking for a Jingwei yet again.
After seeing Krakito on the Jingwei, though, I would honestly like to see him on a more aggressive dual lane matchup, because Homie can certainly hold his own. That is one thing that he definitely managed to establish in game number 1, but wouldn't be surprised if we maybe see some adjustment from Goodnight Nick in terms of maybe looking to prioritize that Odin if it's still up for grabs, as opposed to the Osiris first pick that we saw coming out of them in game 1. Potentially even looking to throw Ice onto the Kali, even force Worst Turtle into a different pick and try to compromise Just F6 that way.
This Heimdall ban from Just F6, I've got to imagine it has to purely be a respect ban to Krakito. That's the only thing I can imagine with a Heimdall in your top 3 as a ban, is it has to be respect, because Heimdall's good, but I don't know if he's top 3 ban-worthy good.
I mean, depending on who's playing him, and again, after what we just saw to Krakito on the Jingwei, definitely impressed by what he showcased, so understandable. I was literally just asking, hey, can we see Krakito on something more aggressive? And Just F6 were like, actually, we don't want to.
No, not today. Not today with it. Again, not today with Goodnight Nick going for the Odin. Instead, they first picked the Osiris yet again. Same exact 6 bans we saw in game number 1. Same exact top 3 in this game as well. Osiris for Goodnight Nick. Just F6 go with the Odin on her yet again.
Just F6 might be in the second pick here, J-Mac, but because they won game 1 in the fashion that they did, I think that they are ultimately in the driver's seat right now, kind of controlling the pace of this picks and bans to an extent, because they're not the ones that really are forced to switch anything up, and by the looks of it, Goodnight Nick doesn't even really feel as though they've got a whole lot that they need to change either. A complete run back so far of the top 3 that they opted for in game number 1. Curious to see if this is going to be a Yemoja yet again from Just F6, given that it worked the first time.
Yes, it is. Same exact top 6 bans, same exact top 6 picks from Just F6. We'll see if the bans for the next round go the exact same way. It was Scylla Raijin for Just F6 and Kamazot's Wheelish, I believe,
Yes.
for Goodnight Nick. So far, we're at 1 for 4. The Scylla banned away for Just F6.
Ah.
Kali banned away this time. We're going to at least see something different earlier on.
Worst Turtle is going to have to draw it back to the drawing board. I mean, what else is there to say there? But Gilgamesh, still up for grabs, could be a replacement factor that I think would definitely be suitable towards Just F6 in the way that they prioritize that team fight composition. But Just F6 banning away the Baba Yaga will now give them leverage, taking this Raijin into the mid lane. Could be, I think, a potential response of a Soul, maybe, from Wolfie, just because she does have a lot of clear potential in that laning phase, so it wouldn't automatically default to just Raijin having outright pressure there.
With the Kamazots locked in, as well as a Soul. So Goodnight Nick taking that one away from Sotos, who had a great performance on it earlier, and I'm fairly sure that was Isa saying, look, did you see what he did to me at like level 6 with that super? No, we need that on our side of the map. We need that for our team. They lock in the Soul at Kamazot, so a lot of damage on the side of Goodnight Nick. Meanwhile, you do see the response with the Raijin. And a Nemesis lock in here for Just F6. Going with the 10th pick, Nem. I remember when Nem was like first banned for so many teams back in the Rise of the Cthulhu meta, when he was like the #1 to go to, was ban Nemesis, ban Nemesis, ban Nemesis. And it just kind of went radio silent for a while.
Don't be surprised if you continue seeing that resurface of the Nemesis, not just here in the Challenger Circuit level, J-Mac, but potentially even higher up as well. But love this Nemesis pick. She accomplishes more or less a lot of the same things that a Kali would typically look for. A solid flank watch god, I think. Not only that, but her ultimate is going to make it incredibly difficult for Kalis and Deathwalker to be those big frontlining factors that you would want.
Game 2 starting up, Just F6 with a big win last time, so they have advantage going into Game 2. As far as their scoreboard goes, they only need to win 1 more. Meanwhile, Goodnight Nick would need 2 in order to close out this best-of-3 set. As you saw, J-Mac and Taco once again on the call with Doug on the cams, making sure to bring us the action. Wolfie flipping around as the Baba Yaga was banned. A nice response. We saw the Raijin picked up for Sotos. Wolfie taking away the Soul, more importantly, getting that one out of Sotos' hands, get him on something. I don't know if I would call Soul more safe or less safe than Raijin. I mean, Disapparate is a disgustingly good ability, but I mean, Thunder Crash can go over a wall.
The thing about Raijin is when it comes to the Thunder Crash mechanic, you don't ever want to be utilizing it in a defensive manner. If you were having to try and rely on Thunder Crash for the retreat, chances are things have already gone pretty far south for you. Raijin is very much a god that just screams pressure. And I think that is something when paired alongside of the slows out of Worst Turtle on that Divine Retribution, or Divine Judgment, excuse me, it's going to be incredibly difficult to escape from that chase out of Just F6. Disapparate can definitely buy you some time, but ultimately, it's not like you're going to be immune forever.
Wolfie's starting to put a little bit of pressure in mid. Toddy taking quite a bit of damage, gets knocked up after the sun. Kalas continuing the chase, but Riptide there to make sure that Kalas doesn't walk any further forward. Make sure to keep Toddy alive. That's already the horrific emblem burned away from the dual lane support.
Listen, Toddy's seen it all before, J-Mac. He just spent the entirety of Game 1 pretty much being abused in that dual lane position just to make the play matters when it counted most. So I don't think that Just F6 are really all that concerned about not having outright pressure on this dual lane early on. I'm not certain whether or not we're going to see Ice looking to visit the dual lane as often as he did in Game 1 as well with this Kamazots. Might be better off just looking to try and pressure this Nemesis and Raijin early on before they get a chance to really hit their power spikes.
As a matter of fact, I think Toddy finished 2 and 3 in the last 2 kills that he actually got was in that final Phoenix push back. So, yeah, Toddy did have a whole lot of luck last game. Going up against a crit Jingwei, never fun for you. Never fun going up against crit, especially when you're not the one who's getting the RNG luck.
No, it always sucks having to be the hunter that has to play for shredding the front line, but the auto attack speed build worked out for him, and having all that pen and HP shred off the chin size and whatnot definitely paid off for Toddy here, so he might be willing to forego his opportunities for critting if it means having the chance to bring his team the win in the late game.
Disarm and stun on Toddy. Gets pushed away by the persistent Gust. Scorpion goes down. Double stun out of Rotwin, but no further Omi for another follow-up. So just F6 will just go ahead and claim their prize of the Scorpion, and then they'll walk back towards their purple buff as that's set to respawn in just a couple of seconds. Meanwhile, Wolfie and Ice Ice team up to drop down the red buff, and now Ice Ice will make their way towards speed just to pick up their extra experience. And Deathwalker, no stranger from the last game, being invaded at blue. Meanwhile, Kalas going for an invaded purple buff. Deathwalker probably going to lose out on that, but Ice Ice has made the rotation, fork on the speed buff, still looking for anything they can. Blink on the Worst Turtle, but misses the Screech, or the Vampire Bats, gets the Screech for some damage. Lystemix trapped in the back line, and Wolfie, with the rotation, picks up first blood.
Still a good punish here from Goodnight Nick, and a nice adjustment as well. Last game, we saw them trying to emphasize that dual lane early on, but punishing Worst Turtle and Lystemix for their over-aggression into Deathwalker's blue buff. DW might not have the buff, but I'm sure he'll be more than happy to see his mid laner take that first blood bounty.
Yeah, it's a big bounty swing for them, considering that Just F6 are continuing to push them back in this dual lane. Krakito and Kalas, though, still stepping forward. Luckily for Toddy, he's got some sustain, thanks to the help of the Emoji between her basic attacks that will grant a little bit of a heal over time, plus the just natural heal. Knock up comes through, stun misses out of Rotwin. So Kalas not going to be in too much danger here on this Fafnir.
Doesn't seem as though Toddy or Rotwin are all that concerned about what's been taking place in the dual lane. But something to keep in mind with Goodnight Nick having a little bit of pressure with that first blood kill taking place on the solo side of the map does make room, I think, for Ice Ice to maybe pay a visit to Just F6 on their next purple buff rotation. Have to remember that Kalas, even though he wasn't successful in stripping that buff away for Goodnight Nick, the simple fact that he was in the area means he's got control of the timer.
And sometimes that's all that you need. Make one little call out for your jungler to make a rotation left. Toddy loses the beads, and that's going to be a massive call out for Kalas towards Ice Ice to let them know, hey, one of the big safety factors of Toddy gone. Now, Camazot's not really one to capitalize on beads being down more than anything, but immediately you do see that rotation from Ice Ice. Leap in by Kalas, finds Rotwin. Knockup is good. Ice Ice with the bats and the Screech, looking for some final damage. Bat out of hell will be more than enough to get it down. The third swipe just to make sure he gets back to safety.
Great toggling of the tower focus as well. Krakito tanking up those shots so that Ice Ice had a total freebie while diving Toddy, and side lanes continuing to be pressured out here for Just F6, not leaving a whole lot of wiggle room for Worst Turtle to look for a recovery aspect in the early game at least, but he's been silently farming along, and despite the fact that Ice Ice finds himself with the kill, he's not going to really be at that much of an advantage experience-wise.
Even despite the loss in game number 1, Goodnight Nick still showing up just as strong as they did in game 1 here in game number 2, maybe even a little bit stronger than they were. Much earlier establishment of a lead, tuning to about 1,500 gold so far.
Could definitely be a little bit of a rage factor, no pun intended either for Krakito, when I'm sure he's probably going to run it back with the rage second item after he finishes that Ickful, but losing a game in the fashion that Goodnight Nick did, just being compromised off of one bad team fight, it can definitely be a blow mentally, and I think that because of the fact that Goodnight Nick is as veteran of a roster as they are, that's by far one of the primary reasons why we still see them managing to just stay intact here.
They do take the Gorp. I had to remember that it's for some reason my mind always wants to call it the Forp because it's like Fury Scorpion, but no, it is the Gold Fury Scorpion, so it does have to go the way of Gorp. Meanwhile, Fire Giant. See, GF, FG, and then you throw Gorp Forp. Sometimes it messes with your mind just a little bit.
That's fair. I think that's pretty reasonable.
But for now, Goodnight Nick looking for an invade at the top side. Looks like they may have at least done some damage to Worst Turtle. Over on the flip side, we just see an Ickfall picked up by them as well, going for a little bit of attack speed on this Nemesis early on.
Something else to note, though, is that there's a 2,000 gold lead just about breaking out between these two teams, whereas last game took a while before we saw any sort of real leads begin to kind of trickle out throughout the map, and I think that this just kind of goes to show that that early game pressure definitely a little bit more in favor of Goodnight Nick ever since they were able to capitalize on that solo buff invade from Just F6.
Yeah, previously it was almost 14, 15 minutes before we saw any major lead be established by Goodnight Nick. This time, starting off a little bit earlier, as you said, 2,000 gold already pushing in their favor. Experience, pretty much even across the board, half level, sitting between Deathwalker, Wolfie, and Krakito over their opposition, though that half level not a whole lot earlier on. Worst Turtle gets spotted out in the jungle, has to use the double dash to get away. Immediately will, oh, he actually stole both of those. I thought they got one, but no, both of those over to go the way of Worst Turtle.
Nice factor of the slice and dice is that confirmation as far as buffs are concerned, and Harpy congestion definitely a little bit more favorable towards that Nemesis in comparison to the Camazotz. Toddy, on the other hand, seems like he wants to be aggressive up against Krakito despite being at a slight level deficit, knows that he's got to try and fend off Krakito from this purple buff invade opportunity, but a rotation out of Worst Turtle is going to keep Goodnight Nick at bay for the time being. However, Gold Fury just going to be pulled immediately.
Ice, Kalas, and Krakito immediately leap towards it. Wolfie and Deathwalker on the side of the map as well. Gold Fury down to half health. Goodnight Nick starting it up. Rotwin uses the ultimate, but to no avail for his own health as he falls down instantly in the fight. Gold Fury started up, but Worst Turtle picks up Krakito alone on the backside and is able to squeak by with still full health. Soda's low, having to use the ultimate defensively. Deathwalker in a bit of danger. Listemics creeping up. Worst Turtle still had the ultimate available. Leap over the wall by Listemics chasing down Deathwalker, but that passive makes sure that he can get right through the cage. Worst Turtle stunned, but still chasing down Deathwalker. Slows him with the slice and dice. Listemics needs just a little bit more damage, but with the return from Goodnight Nick, the cavalry arriving, Listemics is now the one in danger and has to leap out.
A full 4-man rotation. Goodnight Nick scrambling to try and peel each other out of danger. But that's the flank that Worst Turtle is going to consistently be looking out for. Goodnight Nick, I think they had the right idea. Everybody was grouped up in the vicinity for that Gold Fury pool, but a mild hesitation and the split to look for the team fight. It seems as though Goodnight Nick weren't totally prepared to drop that Gold Fury outright. They just were not expecting that damage out of Worst Turtle in the back line.
And meanwhile, because of that, they didn't end up getting that Gold Fury. It's still standing nice and pretty. As Goodnight Nick weren't able to close it out because Worst Turtle killed the last member that was standing on it. Able to get him with that slice and dice, a little bit of extra damage. So Worst Turtle off to a nice lead so far with this Nemesis. Kalas leaps into the jungle camp and able to take away at least one of those Harpies. Krakito will start up the Draugr. Toddy unsure if they're even aware that it's happening for the time being, but Draugr will be taken down, so Krakito does get a little bit of extra bounty, a little bit of extra golden experience for the team.
Toddy a little bit more concerned about just clearing out his purple buff. Yeah, that too. He has not been having fun trying to deal with this Jingwei in the dual lane, but again, it's a team game for a reason, J-Mac, and as long as Toddy can continue to play around the rest of his squad, Just F6 don't really have to be all that concerned about their on-her in the 1v1 engagements against Krakito. But one more time, Gold Fury going to be pulled, and this time it might be in favor of Goodnight Nick.
Very late on the response from Just F6. Goodnight Nick able to take the Fury. Nice stun from Rotwin, but it's too little too late as that one falls down and goes the way of the Order team. Looking across the board for the gold, about 3,000 gold now in favor of Goodnight Nick after getting that Fury. Toddy leapt on by Kalas. A lot of damage, but Toddy's not deterred by it. Lose about half their health, a little bit more after the third stun comes through from that hammer in the Dwarven form. Kalas able to push Toddy back to the feet, or at least back to the fountain.
Great recognition, though, from Toddy. He could tell that it was just Kalas. Even though it's annoying dealing with that damage, well, actually hold that thought. Toddy held on to those purification beads for a reason. Going to try and knock Krakito out of the tower. Instead, it's going to be Krakito expending the agility early on, and Toddy getting lasted with the Desert Fury. Now Kalas trying to escape, but Worst Turtle with the Divine Judgment be able to lock him down, no problem. An excellent punish from Just F6, and Goodnight Nick punished heavily on the duo side of the map where they were honestly faring the best, J-Mac.
Huge response there from Worst Turtle, making a big rotation to the duo to not just bail out Toddy, but pick up 2 massive kills along with it. Sure, Gold Fury goes the way of Goodnight Nick, but that ensuing fight after is a big boon there for Just F6. You don't see a whole lot of it in response for the gold, nor really the experience. You do see about a half-level lead in favor of Toddy now, where he was down about a half-level. So got almost a full level's worth of experience to boost over Krakito.
Just not entirely sold on why Kalas was so determined to try and run it down on Toddy in the duo lane. He spent so much time on that side of the map. You have to imagine that Toddy is letting his team know. And I guess if you're Kalas in that position, especially with him having as much veteran experience as he does, you have to understand that there's going to be a rotation likely coming through as a result of you spending so much time harassing Toddy underneath his T1 tower.
Rotman gets a Riptide, forces Collis to walk around it. Immediately back to the mid lane. They still do manage to get the Oracle Harpies for Goodnight Nick, so undeterred. But Ice still hasn't finished up this Transcendence they picked up way earlier on in the game. It was a first item rush, but still a couple of stacks from finishing it away. A lot of the focus has been on these fights and a little bit less on farm.
It will be a 20% cooldown reduction, though, in total between the hi-rez and the Transcendence once he gets those last 2 stacks online. But when you look across the way to Worst Turtle, he's finished off the Wind Demon. It seems as though he's trying to match crit power with crit power up against Kirkido this game. Knows that Toddy is going to be prioritizing that Aussie for the lifesteal, looking for a little bit more of that frontline shred yet again. But Nemesis, definitely one of the best gods for terrorizing hunters.
Not just hunters, but even with that ultimate, really making your supports and your solo laners fear for their life a little bit by stealing some of those protections away. It allows you to make those big dives, makes you just a little bit tankier to try and deal with those hunters. So Worst Turtle going for that crit build as we see the tier 1 for the Hidden Blade picked up, going towards a second crit item earlier on. Collis trying to put a little bit of poke to Sodos under the mid lane tower, but misses the hammer, so no further follow-up, and not like there was much to be gained from it, just throwing out the hammer for the sake of throwing it.
And this is also where it kind of enters the discussion. You know that you're up against the Nemesis. You see numerous slows. I believe everybody actually on Just F6 has a slow. Kirkido going to be forced into his escape early on. Ultimate expended now from this Jingwei. Toddy still hot on the pursuit. No rage stacks here for Kirkido, and Kirkido punished for trying to invade Toddy's Oracle. A friendly reminder that Honor definitely still does damage, but getting back to it, J-Mac, what I was trying to say about Collis, he's taken this horrific yet again for the team. In Game 1, I think we saw moments where the horrific sort of panned out, but it was just kind of lackluster, I think. And when you're dealing with the likes of an entire team with slows, can't help but wonder how much better suited a sprint would have been for the team.
Aegis out of Kirkido just off the Blink basic from Worst Turtles. That's going to be one massive relic taken away. Collis has elected to upgrade that Horrific Emblem immediately, so it gets a nice little bit of extra bonus with it, reducing not just attack speed, but also reducing the power of the enemy team. But again, like you're saying, there's a lot of crit on the other side, there's a lot of slows on the other side. I would think Heavenly Agility would be really nice, or even just a few Wing Blades across the board.
And not only that, but Rotwan, he's already got the sprint as a response. He was anticipating Collis to run it back with the horrific early on. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here, J-Mac, is even with this early upgrade of the horrific, sprint just negates it outright. And unless Goodnight Nick start looking to take more initiative towards forcing picks against the likes of Just F6, I'm just not sold that Collis is really going to get the full extent of utility out of this horrific because of the measures that Just F6 have taken to respond to it accordingly.
Deathwalker, the lone zone for Goodnight Nick, as Collis makes their way into the jungle to group up and get ready for this Oni Fury that has respawned. Goodnight Nick have the vision control and they've got the positional advantage, but Lystemix is not going to let this one go for free. Walking forward with that spear, Deathwalker now in the middle of 4, has to back away, get some good damage onto Sodos, but the Fury has been leashed yet again, and now Worst Turtle is dealing with 2 players in mid, Wolfie and Ice, making sure to keep the jungler pushed back, and Tier 1 tower does fall down.
Goodnight Nick, though, relatively spread for the time being. Just F6 recognizing that Goodnight Nick were putting a lot of pressure onto Worst Turtle there in mid, start trickling over with their rotations, but Goodnight Nick, they've got to be careful about these consistent Oni Fury pools. If they're going to commit, they can, but don't take too much damage out of the objective.
Dragon Form and the AoE Coerce. Oni Fury leashed immediately. River's Rebuke doesn't grab anybody. Cage managed to hold 2 in place. Deathwalker zoned and dealing with Toddy and Rotwin. Cage falls down. Back onto the Fury. Goodnight Nick goes. Soto still has ultimate available, but Goodnight Nick get the Fury. Lystemix blinks in, looking for a stun onto anybody. Finds Kirkido, gets the beats, gets the airstrike out. But now it's Ice trapped in the middle. Uses the Bat out of Hell to swipe against 3. Soto's locked in place and taken down. Deathwalker strikes first in the fight and looking for a second one as he falls down. Rotwin takes the spill. Listemics able to trade out and make this a 2-for-2, however, as Krikito and Wolfie both fall. Listemics looking for another one, picks up the double kill with the Ice Eyes. Now Deathwalker is in trouble. Listemics picks up the triple kill for the solo laner. Kalas, the only one left for Goodnight Nick.
And Toddy, relics or not, the collapse just wasn't there. Goodnight Nick's target focus a little bit too split, and not only that, a lot of their team fighting utility having been expended just to confirm the Oni Fury for themselves. So they'll take the Oni Fury, but Just F6 coming out on top from the engagement after the fact, J-Mac, can't help but feel as though that definitely leans more in favor of Just F6 than it does for Goodnight Nick.
Gold still in favor technically for Goodnight Nick as they have the lead, but a little bit of a gap closed by Just F6. Sure, you lose the Oni Fury, but what did they get out of it? Absolutely nothing. They got a couple of kills.
Well, they got killed for it.
They got 2 kills. Cool. They lost 4 in response. They also lose their Tier 1 tower left side, and those Oni minions didn't push down a single one of the towers. Tier 1 and mid was already done. Tier 1 and solo lane, not even really a threat, as it was minions already pushed down by Listemics.
If you lose one member after pooling an objective, whatever. If you lose 2, okay, unfortunate, but keep it moving. When you're losing 3 or more in response to taking an objective, it's just not worth the trade out at the end of the day. And Oni Fury as well, I think that those are simply just going to be easy ways for Just F6 to clear out, no problem. And in fact, a little breakaway for Toddy now on this honor. He was being abused in the entirety of game 1, J-Mac, but just had a resurgence of life here in game number 2 with this honor. Executioner already online, Chinsai's sure to follow, and the Pyromets are still being looked at from Goodnight Nick, but again, they're not all grouped up here. Ice Ice, Krikito, a little bit spread elsewhere on the map. Meanwhile, Just F6, they're just biding their time. The team fight has looked very clean on Just F6 end.
I just looked over at the player damage. I noticed that Toddy is sitting 3 player damage under his solo laner, away from being top damage. It's one of those you're looking back and forth, and you just see your name flickering between top player damage and me, solo. It's like, who's going to get it eventually? But
it's going to be Sotos at the end of the day anyway.
Okay.
Ryzen, mages always win.
That's fair. That's fair. It is a mage. I don't know how I could think that a mage wouldn't get the top. Maybe if it was like an Aphrodite, maybe not top damage, but most of the time, yeah.
You would be surprised. You have to combine. I think
depends where the Aphrodite is.
It's an unspoken rule that when you're dealing with healer compositions, you have to combine their player healing to their player damage as well.
Fair.
I think
that's
that's
not
a
fair.
reasonable rule.
Look, you get
I don't make the rules, J-Mac.
Look, you get some gods like Hell who can put up like 30, 40k damage, maybe not in a a short game, but in a really long set they put up 30, 40k healing, and then you throw 30, 40k damage onto that as well. Look,
that's nice, right? That the mages deal
not for
as much damage as they're healing.
Well, not for the other team. It's not nice. For your team, that feels really good. It's like, dang, you put up 30k damage. It's not, it's not the 45, 50k the enemy team did, but hey, you also put up 35k healing. That's pretty sick.
Actually, a little curious. Didn't actually take note of it from game 1, but Ra went on this Yamoja. I'm not even certain how much sustain he's been able to factor in already for the team. 2,600, so
not bad.
That's a pretty noticeable margin. It might not seem like a lot, but you have to remember 2,600 is basically one member from Goodnight Nick's player damage.
Yeah, if we're talking, North American side where they're constantly fighting and they're at 10, 12,000 player damage for every person by this point, 2,600 isn't that much, but over on the other side of the pond here, 2,600 pretty much almost makes up all of Krikito's damage that they've done to the flip side of it. 3k player damage sitting at the bottom for Rotwin, but as mentioned, if you throw the healing in there, it's sitting on the upper end of the chart. Actually put them right above Wolfie.
Nobody's close to Deathwalker right now, though, on this Osiris. He has been a nuisance as far as poke is concerned. Seems as though he just wants to take this T1 tower for his own as well. Not the healthiest for Listemics, but Lord of the Afterlife now going to be forced out of DW. Doesn't want to become a victim towards his Just F6 rotation. Nice heads-up play from Just F6, making their presence known, but now it's Toddy on the runaway over in duo.
Use the ultimate immediately in response to the stun from Kalas, so making sure to hold on to both of their relics for the time. So Toddy loses out on Tier 1 tower. Never feels good. Tier 1 solo lane also falls. The 1,000 gold swing in favor of Goodnight Nick, but it's not like their lead is getting any bigger. They're still sitting around this 2,000-3,000 gold position that they were in even before they started up that Oni Fury kill earlier on. Now it's just F6 with the responses. They go immediately to the Primal Manager. They are shredding this one down, able to grab it. Supernova used, but not going to get the steal from it. Lystemic's playing the zone, and Kalas unable to close the gap, so just F6 get a clean Primal Fury.
Sprint pop just for good measure there by Rotwin as well, but I don't think anybody from Goodnight Nick was even close to having an opportunity to try and punish just F6 for that pool onto the Primal Fury, and that's just going to make it one step easier as well for just F6 to take this Fire Giant for their own, now having that bonus damage of the Primal Fury factored in, so crit becoming less and less of a necessity here, I think, for Toddy, especially when you still have Worst Turtle on the other end of the spectrum with this Wind Demon and Deathbringer.
Fire Giant down to half, just F6 shredding this one. River's Rebuke comes through, just F6 get the Fire Giant. How much can they get on the tail end of it? Ice has to use his ultimate in a response with Deathwalker as well. Lord of the Afterlife out. Lystemic's jumps in, but not going to find anything else. Screech is good, but a Riptide pushes Kalas back into the team and forces them to use the leap to jump away. Just F6, again, another clean objective.
It's always funny watching the members of Just F6, though, run through Rotwin's Riptide. Rotwin's had some great placements on these Riptides, sure, but it's still hilarious that Just F6 getting mildly compromised for it after the fact, but it's the pools of these Primal Furies. They're not giving Goodnight Nick a chance to resettle on the map. They went from Primal straight to that Fire Giant, took full advantage of the bonus damage against it, and now Worst Turtle lurking on the back end, looking for execution onto Goodnight Nick's backline.
Kalas gets pushed back by the Riptide and stunned immediately after, down to half health. Worst Turtle still waiting in the wings to see if they can grab anything from this Tier 2 tower, but just F6 unrelenting. They will stand firm at the Tier 2 and continue their push.
Jesus.
Worst Turtle, I should say, Krakito finds Worst Turtle in the jungle, and Worst Turtle sends him back to the fountain.
Krakito nearly dead to rights there, and that was just a few in-hands from Worst Turtle. A nice auto attack chain cancellation as well. The slice and dice nearly enough to take Krakito down there. Fortunately, he manages to survive, but no longer having that airstrike in tow now means that just F6, they don't have to back and spend that gold just yet. They can look to capitalize and take away this duo side T2 tower, potentially even make a push onto the left side Phoenix, although it might be a better call just to back and buy with everything that they just amounted.
Yeah, a lot of gold in hand, looking at over 1,000 to 1,500 plus for all of these players. They're finally making their way back to the base. As you can see, what they elect to pick up, it's the Soul Gem out of Sodos is their first item back. Spectral Armor is finished up from Lystemic's earlier on. We might see him sell that Tier 2 Fighter's Mask, as they have a little bit of extra gold in hand as they back as well. Looking across the board, however, just F6 with that Fire Giant, they've amounted themselves now a 2,000 gold lead, swinging about 4,000 since that Fire Giant fight. Sure, they didn't get any kills off the Fire Giant. They didn't have to, as they just had more than enough shred. And it's kind of funny to see it because Kalas on the Fafnir with the Dragon Coerce and a Frenzy felt like they couldn't even shred these objectives as fast as just F6 is.
No, I think that's just the crit difference between Worst Turtle and Toddy. There is just so much shred taking place and a nice amount of burst just to kind of seal the deal. First, just F6 are on these objectives. Raijin definitely has some pretty solid, I think, objective confirmation here. I don't think Deathwalker's trying to really put up a heavy defense on this T1 tower, just trying to poke the bear and see what he can get.
He will force them to walk away. Riptide, or I should say double, triple Riptide used from Rotwin, so Deathwalker and team able to hold a defense for the time, but that's just for a brief moment. Now just F6 have regrouped. Worst Turtle walking over a ward, gets spotted, and that's a good call for Goodnight Nick to back away at least towards Tier 2 tower. See, that one started up here in just a moment, but Ice gets to that speed buff just narrowly, avoiding the damage from it. Just F6 continue to push forward. Lystemic's taking up the tower for the rest of the team. As the minions do start to make their way in, Toddy able to get a little bit of damage onto the tower, and Deathwalker gets stunned, and maybe a little worse for wear with no further follow-up, however. Just F6 only get the structure, and that'll be good enough for them.
I like this patience from Worst Turtle. Could have looked to pull the trigger there on Deathwalker since there was a decent gap of separation between DW and the rest of his squad, but Worst Turtle just waiting it out for the perfect opportunity to utilize that Divine Judgment for a pick. And I think it's so unsettling right now if you're Deathwalker or Callis, because you have to remember they might be the frontliners, but without a Spectral, it could be tough to frontline.
Sotos has to ult in response to Deathwalker. Airstrike from Krakito and Bat Out of Hell from Ice Size. Put him in the dirt. Rotwin has to play defense for Toddy. Use the River's Rebuke and the Cage in combination. Wolfie has to use the Disapparate, and Rotwin picks up Krakito with the damage from the Rivers falling through. Kalas into the Dragon Ultimate, still looking for a little bit more damage, or maybe just a defense. Lysemix jumps in, Kalas low, Kalas down, Toddy takes him out and picks up the double kill, picking up Wolfie in the process. Ice Ice now on the run, but Worst Turtle has enough chase to make sure that they can keep Ice Ice busy, while the rest of the team continue the chase to Deathwalker.
And I'm not sold that it's going to be enough for a lone Osiris without that Lord of the Afterlife even being available to prevent Just F6 from sieging this Phoenix. And JMag, we could potentially be looking at another game ender here for Just F6. They might just 2-0 Goodnight Nick and finally put themselves on the board for the standings.
Looks like they're gonna not to go towards the throne room instead. They'll just get the first Phoenix, one in the mid lane, now looking for a second one. Deathwalker will try and hold front line to keep them pushed away. Minions are here, and that'll be enough for Tidy to start swinging at the Phoenix. Worst Turtle finally making sure to leave Ice Ice alone. We'll be able to rotate through him now, start getting quite a bit of damage on them. We'll get that left side Phoenix, so not quite the end yet, but a big dent put in the armor of Goodnight Nick.
I can respect the safe but sorry, or yeah, I think it's better to be safe than sorry here for Just F6. I definitely think that they definitely had the damage in tow to look for a potential game in there, especially since it was only Deathwalker left standing and no T2 towers on the map to really enhance that Titan health. But why take a risk when you can just look for the best Phoenix in the game? The immediate map pressure, regardless, is going to be enough, I think, for Just F6. But it's the Fire Giant actually being pulled by Goodnight Nick. This is a Hail Mary call.
Well, under half health, Fire Giant destroyed by Goodnight Nick. But how's the fight going? Response immediately. Lysemix jumps in the back line and gets a big cage. Kalas low, as well as Ice Ice still using the Bat Out of Hell as an escape. But Kalas doesn't have that same luxury. Worst Turtle picks up one. Wolfie on the run, caught up at a pillar, and no further defense is available to him. Toddy picks up another big kill. Now 5 for the Hunter, and still looking for more. Ice Ice on retreat with Krakito. It's only them and Deathwalker for defense, but Fire Minions, Taco, they're starting to push up the other lanes.
And with 2 minion waves of Fire Minions heading in already, a third Phoenix going to be pulled down. Base fully exposed now, and Just F6, that might have been the opportunity now. Goodnight Nick had the right idea, I think. Take the objective so the opposition can't have it, but at what cost? Too much traded out, and Just F6, they're looking for the collapse.
Lysemix getting some damage. Krakito, big crits return to Worst Turtle. Titan finally under siege, down to half health. Cage dropped, and Titan no chance of standing with no extra structures, no extra health to it. It's just that easy for Just F6. Right at 30 minutes, they close out the game and the set.
And I think that's part of the problem as well when you look for those sort of Hail Mary shot calls is you have the right idea. You don't want to let the opposition get the Fire Giant, especially since they've already taken 2 Phoenixes. So it almost felt like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation there for Goodnight Nick. The way for them to escape, I think, would have only been if Just F6 hadn't sniffed it out. But unfortunately for them, Just F6 wary of what the competition would do and punishing them appropriately for it.
Just F6 come out with a big win for themselves and able to keep themselves out of the bottom seed. We'll be back after the break to finish closing out the set.
I don't cross my T's. I don't dot my I's. I won't say pretty please, or speaking little white lies. I've got a rebel soul. 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 Just get down with it, down with it, down with it. Just get down. I ain't no
Six come out on top with a big victory for themselves in 2-0 fashion, sending Goodnight Nick all the way down to the bottom of the standings. Unfortunately, they will be at the base end, but Just F6 with a big fight off of a, as you said, Hail Mary play that just went south. It was an interception off the Hail Mary, and Just F6 get the win.
Yeah, I'm honestly still a little bit in awe at how quickly that rug was just pulled out from underneath Goodnight Nick. I don't think that they were anticipating such a swift response there from Jix, but that's the downside to some of these later team fight engagements is you can go for the objective plays all day long, J-Mac, but just because you get them doesn't mean that you're coming out on top, and that was kind of the storyline here in game number 2. Every single objective that went the way of Goodnight Nick almost immediately punished after the fact, whether it was the Gold Furies, whether it was the Fire Giants, it just all came back to haunt him in the end.
That little play right there under the Tier 1 tower is probably one of the big game changers for Just F6 as far as a mentality shift. Toddy showing a lot of discipline under that tower despite being under siege from both members of the Goodnight Nick duo lane. A lot of response from him, and having a more quiet game number 1, sitting basically, I think, is 0-3 all the way till the end. Came out much bigger this time around. I think 5-1 or 6-1 for a final slash line.
Yeah, the other thing there for Collis is that we did see a lot of initiative being taken from the Fafnir, but if you're going to play that aggressive, constantly trying to poke and harass the ADC underneath this T1 tower, you've got to make sure you have a little bit more ward vision in your favor, because that seemed to be the primary compromise for Collis there, is that he had the right idea, I think. It's just, if you don't have the heads up of where everyone is on the map right away, you just leave yourself so susceptible to being punished for it. And again, Just F6 taking full advantage of everything that Goodnight was doing, as well as everything that they wanted to do for themselves.
Talk about a huge flip in the player damage, too. Toddy, who was below Krakito in the last game, now almost triple the player damage of them in game number 2. But looking at the schedule, you do see Just F6 with a nice big win there. 2-0 over Goodnight Nick. Pandemonium Team Joystick, the next teams to face off. That will be Saturday. And like we said, after the SPL on Saturday, the community that Snake Hunters matchup as well. Taking a look at the standings with it, you can see Just F6. They hold out with a 1-2, keeping themselves above Goodnight Nick, who have fallen to the bottom of the standings.
But silver lining there for Goodnight Nick. Krakito subbing in, so losing a set with a substitute definitely doesn't feel as bad, I would say, as losing with your full main roster. I'm not sold that that was really a deciding factor here. I think that Krakito definitely proved to hold his own in that position, but it's still something just worth mentioning.
And with that, that concludes the SCC for today, but that's not the only thing that we've got for you. No. We can't just have the SCC. We've got some big SPL action for you. Olympus Bolts and Solar Scarabs, the first match today. Atlantis Leviathans and the Tartarus Titans will be facing after that one. Those will be our first 2 matches of the week, and our 2 matches here today are big premier ones. Huge match for the Scarabs. They need this win. Not just a win, they need a 2-0 over the Bolts to have any hopes of making it to the playoffs.
Yes, it's definitely a make or break situation here for the Scarabs, but again, gotta say, who's that jungler? Because there might be something spicy in the works here for that second set of the day, J-Mac.
And we might be seeing a little bit of spice coming out for the jungle for the Tartarus Titans, but that's not for us to talk about. That's for the gentlemen over at the waiting room. Gormizer, Dulcin, and Mifflin will bring you all of the spicy information here in just a few minutes, so stick around, and we'll be back with the SPL waiting room.